A while back, we talked about anvils and anvil-shaped objects and anvil substitutes, and we probably talked a little bit in that video about swedge blocks and what a swedge block was, but we didn't go into a lot of detail on swedge blocks. So today I thought I would just briefly cover what a swedge block is, some of the things I use them for, and maybe a little bit about where you might be able to find one of your own. So what is a swedge block? Very simply, it is a collection of useful hollows, depressions, and shapes to forge things into. If you were to take all your favorite swedges, all these nice half-round tools that we use for forming at the anvil, and attach them side by side, maybe you could duct tape them red-green fashion, that would be a very crude swedge block. You could just build one up that way. But people have come up with a much better idea for a swedge block, and that is these nice cast swedge blocks. And these come in various sizes and configurations. Some are available today, some are not. This particular one has 4 sides with different depressions. Most are half rounds because that's the most common, but this one does have a V-swedge in one end. And on the flats it has 4 different size spoon depressions. And on the other side it has 3 different ladles or bowls. These are handy for making candle cups and other things, but very handy depressions. This is probably the swedge block that I use the most for forming in. I don't have a name on this one. I can't see it anywhere. I don't know if it's still available out there anywhere, but you can probably find something very similar still available. And these are cast ductile iron. This isn't cast iron like a skillet or a cooking pot or something like that that is very brittle. This is ductile iron. You can hammer on it. You're not going to hurt them. They aren't hardened steel. They'll take a lot of abuse. This other little swedge block is a Lorentz swedge block. You might be able to read the name on there. And again, it has the usual collection of half rounds. It's got some tapered half rounds. It's got V-swedges in it. It's got some unusual shapes here that I'm not sure what they're supposed to be for. Don't use them very often. This side has a shovel form. Comes in very handy when making fireplace shovels, and we showed that when we did a fireplace shovel. And some very small little ball forms that are handy for doing the ball end hooks. This side has a couple of spoons and a couple of ladles, very similar to this one. So they're very comparable swedge blocks, but not exactly the same. Another thing frequently found on larger swedge blocks is just a collection of holes. And sometimes these are handy for making hardy tools if they're the right size. Of course, this one is not. None of these holes are exactly the same size as either one of my anvils. But they're still useful for various things. If you're drifting an axe or a hammerhead, it's nice to be able to have a place to drive your drift through. You can make tools that specifically fit this. This wouldn't be a bad place to use our axe clamping jig that we made the other day, and you would be able to support the axe here, and that makes it at a more ergonomic height. This is very much like the striking anvils some people make, except way more useful than just a single plate for a striking anvil. And this one can be stood up and of course has an even wider variety of depressions around the side. We've got some hexagonal depressions of various sizes. We've got the 90-degree V-swedges, 60-degree V-swedges, and a bunch of half rounds. So this is a very useful block. I use it in this configuration most of the time. And of course, most of the time it's just a table for cooling things on, but it's awfully darn handy for that. It's kind of a miniature version of a platen table, if you've ever seen the great big platen tables in some fabrication shops. Now I just got this thing, and it is not technically a swedge block, although it has the useful feature, like these square holes here, that you can make hardy tools, except this one actually fits the hardy holes for my anvils. This one's an inch, and this is an 1 3/8, but my 1 1/4 hardy hole on my anvil is a little hollowed little oversized. It's been worn out over the years. So I only have to do a little bit of cleanup to make a tool for my anvil using this particular anvil block. And that the person that sells these calls it an anvil block. But it's got the useful function of the Swedge block in that it's got these two holes, and very comparable to what you'll use a Swedge block for quite often. And we're going to cover making some tools. We'll make some big swedge, bottom swedges for the anvil and some other things, and we'll use this block and show you how that works. Do a whole video on it. Now, for this block to be completely useful, you need to be able to get to these edges, and this is a heavy block. It's probably 150 pounds. There are old Swedge blocks out there that are probably 500 pounds plus that are very difficult to move. My ideal would be to have a hoist in the ceiling, but I haven't set one up, or a small crane. You could use an engine hoist type crane, one of those little cranes on wheels, but I don't have room in my shop to maneuver one. I don't own one, so I'm not going to go there. So the way I do this is with a lever. It isn't too hard to stand this block up by sticking a lever in that hole. And you could use it just like this. If you're just going to use it a little bit, you have to think about it when you stand it up and stand the right side up when you get started. But I also have, I think you can see it in the video, down here is a tray, and there's a slot cut in the stand. And I can drop that down in there, and that makes for a better height, and that block isn't going to tip over and land on my feet. It is a bit of a pain to get back out of there, but again, the lever will do that. Sometimes you have to kind of block up the bottom of the Swedge block as you go. Just make sure you don't stick your fingers under there. At some point you can get that out. If that was a 200-pound block, that would be a lot more work. So it's a bit of fiddling, but it can be done. So there you see the little tray that sits in at the bottom of the stand. Just a big piece of channel iron welded up. Like I said, an overhead hoist would be wonderful, and one of these days I may put a jib crane in, which would mount on one of my posts for the shop. But I need to check with the stress loads, because a jib crane puts incredible leverage on whatever it's mounted to, and I need to make sure my building is actually capable of handling that, even though it would never haul anything heavier than perhaps my anvil. So it'd be 300 pounds would be about the maximum I would ever want to lift with it. Certainly not going to move power hammers around with it or anything like that. And the Swedge block is probably about 150 pounds, so that's not a lot of stress. But nevertheless, if you're going to do something like that, make sure your building will hold the stress. Even if it's just an overhead lifting point, make sure you're designed for it. So that's just a brief introduction to Swedge blocks. Why don't we go in and look at the computer real quick, and I will see if I can figure out where you can actually find some of these online. I know some of the blacksmithing suppliers here in the U.S. sell them. I'm sorry if you're outside the U.S. You'll have to do a little bit of hunting on your own, but they're probably out there somewhere. And if not, you can actually make your own Swedge block if you're willing to make a small one. Roy over at Christ Center Ironworks, it might be 6 months ago now, I don't know, it's been a while, made a little Swedge block. And a very useful little tool. It would sit on the anvil, highly functional, and he did it all with hand tools. So I think you should go watch that video if you're interested in making your own. And I'll put a link to it right up here in the corner. So let's head into the the office and take a look at the computer.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look online, and we can look at some of the things that are available as Swedge blocks. The first place I usually look is someplace like Centaur Forge or Pay Tool. So here's Centaur Forge, has 3 different blocks. These bigger ones are about $500 a piece, and they are 125 pounds. And if I remember right, these are copies of the Wally Yater Swedge blocks, which were very good Swedge blocks, and they're quite sought after. The Centaur blocks, I think, are not finished quite as nicely as the Yater blocks were. But here's a large cone shape. It's got holes for various tools. Square holes are 1/2, 5/8, 3/4, 7/8, 1, and 1 1/4. So that'll get just about any size hardy tool that you're trying to make. So that would be very useful for that. And you've got a ladle and you've got a spoon here. And the other block has the tips of the cone shapes, depending on what you're doing. It's also got a couple of square holes that are 1 inch and 1.5 inch, and more little round depressions and some smaller spoons. So that's a very nice set of Swedge blocks, but you're looking at over $1,000 plus shipping. So they're not real cheap. And that's a problem with Swedge blocks. They are quite expensive. This little mini block is only 6 pounds, so it's not very big. Does it have a dimension? It's 3.5 by 4 by 2 inches thick. So that's a pretty small little block. That's the size that you could probably forge yourself. You could make it out of mild steel. Pay Tool has Swedge blocks, and they have the Lorentz Swedge blocks, which is the brand that I had, which is my kind of a square, smaller one with a shovel pan. But these do not have the shovel pan. This is a different block, so there's still a Lorentz block. I don't know if they make those others. 50 pounds, $275. That's a more reasonable price, I think. But again, they're kind of expensive tools, so you've got to really want one or get really lucky to buy a used one somewhere. But it's worth keeping an eye out for. Most people don't know what these are, so the used tool market outside the blacksmithing community probably does not value them like they do anvils. Here's this little tiny Swedge block from Pay Tool, which looks to be almost identical to the Centaur Forge one. And the green Mangle Swedge blocks. I've heard the name, but I've never seen one of these blocks in person. It's got a shovel form and a few other details. I wish they had larger pictures, and I don't see a way to enlarge the image here. But this one is 10 by 10 by 3 3/4, 66 pounds. That's a good size Swedge block. That'd be a very nice block. And then here's a companion block, which I assume is about the same size. Yeah, exactly the same size and weight. Great big depression here. You could probably make a skillet in that. Ladle size 5 inches, it says. Here we go. One deep ladle, 7.5 inches. That's pretty nice. One problem with these specialty Swedge blocks like this is they're all a little bit different, and if you weren't careful, you could collect all of them. There's a mini green Mangle Swedge block. It's only $39, weighs 2 1/4 pounds. That's not super useful, but there are some useful things in here. It also says makes a great paperweight, so maybe it's not the best block in the world. More of a novelty than a real Swedge block. Kane & Sons Blacksmith's Depot. Oop, I just accidentally closed that. Let me bring that back up here. blacksmithdepot.com. Not careful, I close this stuff out. They have a 20-pound Swedge block, which wouldn't be too bad. All the usual kind of stuff there. Still a fairly small block. This one looks much more usable, but then again, it's also 3 1/4, $325. But it's got some good depressions. It's nice that these spoon swedges here actually have a little place for the handle to come in. Most of them do not. I think the green Mangle one from Pay Tool had that. So that's a fairly useful looking block. It's a 60-pound block. It says it measures 12 by 8 by 3 1/2, so that's pretty nice. But no square holes. That's one of the nice advantages to the great big Swedge blocks. Now they have these big punch plates that would have the square holes. That's kind of an interesting item. The small one's $110, so you're getting up into the same prices as a Swedge block. The large one's $285, and it looks like that. But still fairly interesting. But all these places have some kind of a new Swedge block, so they are out there. You can find them. And then I found this place. I had never heard of these guys. This is my first look, so you can hear me ooh and ah right around with you. It looks like they've got some interesting things here. Although I don't see a product list, so I'm beginning to wonder if this is just a documentary of Swedge blocks. A few Swedge blocks currently available. There we go. Yep, they're going to link you right back to the same places. So this is just a place that tells you where you can find them. This says they're all at Blacksmith Depot, although I did not see these for sale necessarily there. Well, anyways, this looks like they're not actually selling Swedge blocks, so that's just the way that goes. So that's just a quick look at my Swedge blocks and what I might do with them. We will use these quite often in various videos. In fact, if you go back, you'll see ads making use this, one of these Swedge blocks. Making a spoon, we used a Swedge blocks. The ball and hook, we used a Swedge block. The fireplace shovel, we used a Swedge block. They get used really quite often. So they're a very handy thing to have in your shop if you can scrounge one up. The great big ones, you're probably going to have to find used. I don't know if anybody is still making a great big monster block. And if they are, they're going to be extremely expensive. They're not cheap. These are probably worth more pound for pound than an anvil is. So they're not a spur-of-the-moment purchase, not an impulse buy. You're going to have to think about it, save up, and splurge at some point. But they're very useful. I think you'll like having one in your shop if you can track one down. You can also have one water jet cut. I've seen that done out of mild steel. But water jet cutting a piece of 2 or 3 inch thick steel to make a Swedge block might cost every bit as much or more than buying a brand new one. So you want to look into that, go for it, but don't be surprised at how much it might cost, because that's an expensive bit of cutting to have done. Anyways, I hope this was useful. Hope you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up if you can. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. Stick around, watch a few more of the videos. Share the videos with your friends, but do make time in your day to get out to the shop. Work on something, make your own tools, make projects for yourself, for your house, for your family, for friends, but do something in the shop, enjoy it, but stay safe, do wear your safety glasses, and we will see you later.